My air blower in my 2014 Ram, which I corrected, and I wanted to just redo the process and share with you guys what I learned. So I hope this is useful to maybe help you diagnose and repair your issues. My issue is when I turn the blower on, I get a good healthy sound blower, but I would not get any air through the dash vents, the defroster, or the floor vents. My first attempt was to check the actuators that are behind the dash below the radial. To remove this, I had to remove the two screws that's below the tray guard. These were T20 Torx screws. Then simply just grab firmly here and pull forward. And remove this piece. And behind here we have 5 plugs to disconnect. Then remove this right out of the way. So the damper motors are behind here. I could see one. So we need to remove this bottom piece. First step is just to remove this piece here and just pull it and it pops right off. The second step is to remove 6 screws. We have 1, 2 on this side, plus 2 down here. Those 6 screws are just 7mm hex screws. For my truck, in order to pull this piece out now, I've got 2 connectors. I've got the 12-volt DC connector here, and I've got a USB connector here. The 12-volt is not a big deal. I can unplug it here. But unfortunately, this USB connector, the only way I can see to get it out with little struggle is to remove the radio so I can access the plug, which is down here. You may be able to reach it if your hands are skinny enough. But anyway, I'm going to remove the radio by removing the 4 screws, 2 on each side. Those 4 screws, again, were 7mm screws, hex head. I'm going to pull the radio forward. It's a little tight, but it comes right out. And then behind there are some connectors. I'm just going to remove these 3 so I can swing it out of the way. Okay, now I'm going to let the radio swing out of the way. And now I can access this plug and disconnect the USB plug. It used to be attached to the firewall. I'm not sure if I snapped the bracket or what, but I'm going to remove that. Okay, now that that's unplugged, I put these 3 plugs back in behind the radio, and I'm just going to insert the radio to keep everything out of my way. Just temporarily. We'll remove it again in a second to reconnect that plug. So now I have this one here, which we can disconnect, and then I'm going to be able to remove the bottom. Okay, 12-volt plug is now disconnected, and so is the USB cable. That's it right here. And we can remove this piece right out of the way. Now I have great access to these 2 damper motors. I tested both of these motors, and they both were operational, so my problem is not here. One thing I learned about these motors when I put them back is I think there's a timing involved. I haven't read up on this, but I'm going to remove it and show you what I'm talking about. I'm removing these 2 Phillips screws. So at this point, there's no power going to anything. My key is out, And I'm just going to drop this motor and see what it looks like. So I'm going to pull it out. And then you can see the damper. So the damper here, there's a symbol right there, which tells me that when we put this back together, that damper should be in that position, like that. So I can hear the damper going one direction to the other. The other thing that's interesting about the motor is it has an arrow right there. And you see I pulled this thing out and there's an arrow right there on top of the collar. And those two need to be lined up. So when we insert this back in, they're going to line up on that gear like that. So here we're not lined up, so I have a problem. So I'm going to rotate it just a little bit. And I just can't get it to line up anymore for those screws to match. So you see I'm off a little bit. So here's what I did to fix that. So I'm going to use these knobs and energize that motor and get it in the right position. But this is a bulky piece. So right below here, there's 4 screws that removes the knob assembly. And I'm going to take those off. 1, 2, and 2 on this side. Okay, I removed the 4 Phillips screws, and this thing just comes right out in my hand. And I'm going to plug this back into the appropriate connectors. Okay, now that that's plugged in, I've got control of the motors again. I'm going to take the motor, I'm going to watch it. And what I want to do is I want to line up that arrow with that arrow. And to me it looks like it's already aligned. But I'm going to change it. I'm going to do that by just turning the key on. And you're going to see that motor rotate. So there it goes, it rotated. So if I use the fan knob, I'm going to turn it off. Now it's off, it rotates. And it's rotating. Turn it back on. And it rotates the other way. Turn it back on. And it rotates. So now I'm way off the mark. But the arrow's getting closer. So I'm going to turn it back on. It's going that way. Turn it back off. And it just passed up the mark. So the way I fix that, I'm going to energize it, but then I'm going to unplug it right when it is where I need to be. So I'm going to turn the key. I'm going to turn the fan on. Turn the key off. Turn the key on. It's going to rotate. It did not rotate, so I'm going to turn off the fan. And it just keeps rotating because it doesn't see to stop. Then it times out, it stops. So the mark's getting close. It's right there. Alright, so I'm going to do this a couple of times without the camera, and I'm going to unplug it when the arrow is exactly where I want it to be. Okay, I unplugged it, and as you can see, my arrow is almost perfectly aligned, but it's aligned enough where I'll be able to insert this on this damper lever and snaps right in place correctly. So I'm going to put this back together, put the 4 screws, and I did the same thing with this guy, and it all worked. Okay, I've reassembled the actuator motor, that one right here. I put the plug back in. I've also reattached the knob assembly back onto the faceplate. So I'm going to start reversing the process, putting this together. My issue was not with the dampers or the motors, so I'm going to start looking over here into my blower section. Okay, I put the 6 screws back. I plugged in my DC. I have my USB connector right here waiting. I'm going to snap this back on. And I'm just going to remove the radio again so I can remove that or reattach the USB plug behind the radio. Okay, there's the USB plug. Plug that in, and again, it's supposed to attach to the wall, but I think I broke the bracket. So I'm now going to put the radio back in. Okay, USB plug went fantastic, and the radio is back in, all 4 screws. And now I'm going to reattach the plugs to the faceplate and snap it back in and put my 2 screws back in right there. Okay, all 4 or 5 plugs went in perfectly. I wasn't concerned at all about mixing them up because they're all polarized and makes perfect sense and very simple to do. So now I just need to take this unit and kind of maneuver it underneath the shift and put it back right here. Get it lined up and just push it right into place. I can hear those click, click. There's 2 in the bottom. Right there, there, and then I'm going to put these back in now. Okay, that part of the job is done. My dash is back together. I still have a blower issue, but again, I'm going to start looking at the blower, which is below the dash, the glove compartment. And to perform that job, the 3 tools I needed was a T20 Torx, a Phillips, and a Hex 7mm drive. That's all I needed to remove the dash and the radio. Excuse me, the audio center front and the radio. Okay, accessing the blower was pretty easy. First thing I had to do is remove this cover here. It's just kind of like a flexible cover, and it just pulls out. Just grab it in a couple of spots and pull the, there we go, and it just comes right out. There we go. So we'll move that piece out of the way, and then right up here we can see the blower. So I know the blower's working because I hear it and it sounds very healthy, but I'm just going to remove it and see what I can learn. To remove the blower, there's 3 T20 Torx screws. We got 1 in the back, and then 1 right here, and then 1 over here. And also I'm going to remove this plug. Okay, I took out all 3 screws, and blower drops right out. And blower looks good. I know it was running, I can hear it. So let's keep going forward. Okay, so what I found was something very interesting. So if I look up in here, I can see kind of a grill, honeycomb shape, but there's something plugging the grill. My first thought was maybe there was some insulation board and the insulation peeled off the board. I can see it doesn't belong there. So if I use something, for instance, like this pencil, I can push it out of the way. So I feel it. It's just laying there on top of the vent. Okay, so we found a smoking gun. And let me show you what I found. My next step was to remove the glove compartment door. That was pretty easy. It was just a matter of disconnecting this tension cord like that, and then I can push these tabs in, and this one over here, and the door is going to fall right off. And it just has these open hinge attachments. So we'll get that out of the way. And then what I can see in here is, if I look up in there, I can see something. Guess what? It is a dog poopy bag that got sucked from the glove compartment right into the vent intake. That's all it was. The smoking gun, everything is working perfect, and I've got airflow. And another thing I learned is there's the third actuator door right there. Let me activate that for you. Okay, that is the fresh air or truck recirculation vent. So I'm pushing the button on the panel, and the actuator is now coming in to recirculate. I think, I'm not positive. And I'll shut it off. And now it's going to suck air from outside. I think that's the way it is. But anyway, we can see that's clearly working. So I'm going to reverse this process and put everything back together. And make sure my dog poopy bag does not get sucked back up there. Okay, the fan is all put back together. The only tool that required was that 7mm Torx screwdriver. That's it. Everything else just popped apart. Okay, that's it. So the whole issue was a dog poopy bag got sucked up into the intake. Spent all summer in a hot truck for such a silly problem. And I just confirmed that all positions work. The floor, the registers, or the defroster all works. All right, thank you for watching. Hope this helps somebody else out, or at least how to take things apart. And thank you.